Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and it's the first market update of the year, but some of the news that we're going to cover today could dramatically shape how the rest of the year goes.
Thank you for joining us. Welcome to the show. We advise a multi-million pound property fund, and we did over £100 million worth of property deals last year. And this is the show where we bring you some of what we learn along the way for free. We also share our knowledge in the Sunday Times every week. And this Sunday, we're going to be helping an investor who's got themselves in a right mess with a cladding issue. So pick up the Sunday Times to read about that. It's our first market update of the year, and it's the time of year, of course, when everyone is wondering, how is 2024 going to play out? We've already got some clues by looking at what's happened already this year in the realms of mortgages, rents, and house prices. Some very surprising news there to cover. But Rob, let's start with the big picture, because the big story, of course, over the last couple of years for property has been mortgage rates, which are determined by interest rates, which have increased so fast to deal with inflation. So looking at what's happening with inflation is absolutely critical to understand the path that the market is going to take this year. And if people haven't been paying close attention, they might have missed the fact that inflation has actually come way, way down.
It has come way down. The interesting news story that we've got today from The Guardian is it could come down further, and dramatically so. So inflation dropped to 3.9% in November, which is way off its peak. It's certainly heading in the right direction. This is big news, and I do not remember any of the main media outlets covering this in a big way, but this is going to make a big difference to all our lives, is that leading forecasters have issued an update to suggest that inflation will halve to 2%, which is the target for the Bank of England. So that's a critical number. That's a number that the Bank of England and the government are happy with. Will halve to 2% by next year? No, by April this year. So halving from where it is right now by April. I mean, Rob, I want this to be true because that is incredible if it happens. You know, I like to look on the bright side of things. I am finding it hard to believe that it could drop so dramatically, but then it could easily be argued it went up dramatically as well. So it's certainly plausible and possible. And this is down to a slump in energy prices, the cost of oil also coming down. These are the main reasons why inflation could fall to that level. Rob, I'd take another % by April. But if this happens, I think a lot changes for the markets. A lot.
A lot changes for sure. And it opens up the possibility that the economy starts to look very different very quickly. Because remember, central banks want inflation. They've got this 2% target. They need inflation rather than deflation. So if it actually does come back down to the 2% target, they're going to start getting very nervous that it's going to undershoot. And a temporary bout of deflation is a real possibility, especially given that the money supply has gone negative, the money supply is shrinking, and it was a sudden growth in the money supply that was a contributing factor for inflation in the first place. So if this does happen, and I don't know if it will, but if it does, then we could start seeing more rate cuts than the market is currently projecting.
And the market is currently projecting 2 rate cuts, Rob. I think that, based on these numbers, would be the minimum, not just because of deflation, but also political pressures, because although the Bank of England is apparently independent, the government, our current government, will definitely want to see rate cuts before the next election.
Exactly. So swap rates, which you can roughly take as representing a bank's cost of issuing fixed rate mortgages, have fallen by 0.5% over the last month. So that reflects this market expectation that rates are going to come down by that sort of amount. But it's possible if inflation does plummet, then the market starts to expect more rate cuts, swap rates fall further, and mortgage rates therefore fall further. Will any of this happen? I don't know. Is it even a good thing if it happens? Well, yes, of course, we think falling mortgage rates are good. But if the Bank of England has over-tightened and we've got a whole load of impact of that yet to feed through, and that becomes very negative for the economy, then that's not a good thing. So I'm not quite sure what to make of this, Rob, but it will be very interesting to keep an eye on these figures over the next few months.
It's the first market update of the year, and for me, this is huge news already. But it's not even the biggest news story in my mind of this episode, because that is coming up now, and that is house prices. So buckle in, everyone. I did not know this. This one bypassed me with all the Christmas celebrations going on and New Year. But it transpires, according to Halifax, that property prices last year, in 2023, did not fall. No, dear listener. They grew, according to Halifax, by 1.7%. And that is because of a bumper month in December where property prices went up by 1.1%, the third rise in a row. And regular listeners will remember that when we had the first rise, I said at the time going, this could just be a blip. What's going to be interesting is what happens for the next couple of months. Is it a blip or is it a trend? And this, Rob, is starting to become a trend. A trend that I am really struggling to get my head around because the sentiment around the market is so far away from this set of numbers, including my own sentiment. Last year, it felt like the market went down. And if I had the Rob Bent's index based on my sentiment about what's happening, not data, I would have said it was down last year. Rob, we haven't had a chance to discuss this yet, and I know this is quite new to you as well. But what's your initial thoughts and reactions to this?
Well, I think the regional aspect is a big part of it. Because if we're looking at the Rob Bent Sentiment Index, now you're officially a softy southerner. You'll be looking at what's happening or feeling what's happening in the southeast, where house prices fell by 4.5% in 2023. So that's a drop you're going to notice, whereas other parts of the UK obviously more than offset that, and we ended up in a positive. I think the divergence between the two major house price indices is interesting as well, because you've now got over the course of the year Halifax showing this surprise increase, whereas Nationwide showed a drop. And this feeds into the general impression of what the hell's going on, because I do think that these indices are useful. Some people say that the official land registry data is all that matters, and I get that, but it lags by so much. By the time it comes out, it's not really useful anymore. So I think you've got to look at these indices, but when they're both telling you completely different things, it's not straightforward to work out what on earth is going on.
We also have talked about in the past how Halifax tend to lend more in the northern regions and Nationwide more in the southern regions. So again, that stacks up as well by the numbers that we're seeing, is that Nationwide was down last year by 1.8%, far from a crash, but still down 1.8%, and Halifax showing that increase. And I think you make a fair comment on the sentiment, Rob, and my own personal sentiment, because if I think about the areas that we've been focusing on, it's not just the southeast, but it is England really as a whole. And the northern parts of England were pretty much flat last year, according to Halifax. The northwest up by 0.3, Yorkshire up by 0.1. Nothing really massive going on there. It was actually Northern Ireland, the strongest performer last year, which has helped drag the Halifax average up. According to Halifax, prices in Northern Ireland went up by 4.1% last year, and Scotland also up by 2.6%. So markets that I'm not focused on the day-to-day, they're the ones that have dragged the Halifax average up. It's interesting to see. So sentiment, I know from the numbers, the majority of our listeners are in England. We have, great bases in Scotland and Ireland as well, and many other places around the world. But the majority of our listeners are in England. So I think the majority of the people here listening will be going, those Halifax numbers don't seem right. And I can understand why, because what you're seeing won't reflect what Halifax is reporting. So Rob, with that in mind, what does this mean for the property market going forward? Last year felt like a bad year for property. It was not a great year, far from it, that's for sure. However, it certainly wasn't a terrible year. So if we take the two indices and we look at the one with the fall, which was Nationwide, minus 1.8%, that's still not that bad compared to how everybody was talking about the market last year. If you were transported to last year, you were a time traveller, and all you had to do is listen to people talk about property prices and you couldn't see the numbers, I'd suggest that you would have guessed the number far worse than 1.8. So the conversations around property, the media coverage of property was far more negative than the actual. So when talk was so negative and the numbers weren't so bad, I've got the sense that people are feeling more optimistic already this year. We'll see what happens. If optimism starts to come back into the market, what do the numbers do? Maybe your big, bold predictions from last week don't look so big and bold anymore.
I was going to say, I think the takeaway from this is my prediction is nailed on. So what I said was that house prices would be up or down by at least 4%, which sounds like I'm trying to have my cake and eat it, but actually it gives me an 8% band for being wrong, which is quite significant. But what we haven't touched on is the number of transactions. So prices were either up or down a bit, depending on who you listened to last year, but transactions were down a long way because people were basically waiting it out to see what would happen. People aren't going to be willing to wait around forever. So this year, especially with mortgages easing off, more of that in a minute, but the market is going to come back to life. When it does, if mortgage rates have come down and buyers are feeling more confident, there could possibly be some big price rises stored up. We said when we were talking about predictions, we didn't think prices would be strong in the south of England, but they could be less negative, contributing to a big national average. Or I've got my minority negative case, which is the soft landing isn't so soft after all. Recession, job losses, all the rest of it. So the market comes back to life in a very different way. Sellers are forced to reduce their expectations. Prices come down a long way. So like I said, I think the former is more likely. But I'm still feeling really good about it being a big year for property, one way or the other.
A big contributing factor to what happens to property prices this year will be mortgages, which we'll come to in a moment. But before we do, let's quickly talk about rents, because we made our predictions last week on the rental market and what we think is going to happen. But others have also made their predictions. Savills say rents will increase by 6% this year. Zoopla are saying that they think rents will increase by 5%. Both are a little higher than what we predicted, but you can go and listen to that episode if you haven't already. It's in your feed. However, according to an article in Landlord Today, rents actually fell last month, which is really interesting. That really breaks the mold. That is another set of data that I was not expecting to be delivering in this episode. So, Rob, we had rents overall being up last year. We have people, including ourselves, predicting rents to be up this year. So why have rents fallen last month?
I do not know, and you can't read too much into 1 month's data. But I do think rental growth is going to be more modest because all the big shocks that have sent them upwards have passed. And just as a bit of personal insight, I rent where I live in London. So I'm always keeping a close eye on what's happening with rents around me. And it's been rent renegotiation time for me as well. So I've been keeping a particularly close eye on the market. Rents in London, in my bit of centralish London at least, have come down quite substantially. Over the last year, it's gone from being an absolute bun fight for any kind of property, with rents going way, way up, to lots of properties sitting on the market and rents being reduced. So I'm not taking that saying that there's no demand in London anymore. It's not that at all. But I think that the level of rents that people are willing to pay has come down. And we're just seeing the market slowly recognise that, which is why stuff that has last year's prices is just sitting on the market and then gradually being reduced. I negotiated my own rent down this year. When do you ever negotiate rent down as a sitting tenant? It doesn't happen. So this is only London. It's only one part of London. But the change over 12 months is really dramatic. So it'll be really interesting to see if that is just my pocket of London or if that does turn out to be a wider phenomenon.
That poor landlord. Little did they know that they had Mr. Rob Dix, author and podcaster, renting from them. They didn't stand a chance. I'm surprised they're not paying you.
Oh, so let me show you my spreadsheet. All right, you can have the reduction. Just shut up about it.
Well, if you have got a close eye on the rental market, I know I'm certainly keeping a close eye on the mortgage market, but it's not really just me. I know you'll be watching that as well, Rob, and everyone else listening. And we've already said how important the mortgage market will be this year to what happens with property prices. Because if mortgage rates come down, and come down significantly, then that could kickstart the market. And we could see those positive gains that we've both predicted for this year. So it's early doors. We only just started the year, but what is happening? Well, in the last couple of weeks, good news. 5-year fixes have gone below 5%. So the average 5-year fix is 4.96%, which is down from where it was a year ago, at 5.16%. So not a huge drop from a year ago, but it is a drop. But there are some bigger drops because it does depend on the type of product you're going for. And the biggest drop is at 60% loan to value, whereas 5-year fixes now are and this is the average 5-year fix at 60% loan to value, is 4.36%. And that's down from 4.81, so nearly 0.5% less than a year ago. And that makes a massive difference to your payments. And we've only just started the year. And as we've talked about, inflation is predicted to plummet this year. And if it plummets, the market will reprice in more cuts to interest rates. And if more interest rate cuts are expected, these mortgage rates will come down even further because swap rates will come down. And as we said, swap rates have already started to fall. So this is fascinating. So Rob, we're barely a few weeks into the new year and so much is happening. If we just covered this story, that mortgage rates are on the way down, I think a lot of people would be buoyed. I think a lot of people would be happy. This is great news to report. But then you add in that inflation could halve in the next few months, not years, months. And then you find out that according to Halifax, property prices went up last year, or even if you look at Nationwide's numbers, it just fell by a very small amount. There's a lot here to suggest that our predictions last year that went against the consensus, everyone else has predicted falls for this year. This news story, this selection of news, suggests we are setting ourselves up for a decent year when it comes to property prices. Because if you have mortgage rates that are falling, that's only going to bring more people to the market. It's only going to give more confidence. When the media starts reporting that property prices are actually doing well, and then you've got inflation falling as well, so people generally feel better. All this, I'm not getting carried away. It's, as I said, it's only the first few weeks of the year, but all this is starting to create a recipe for a decent 2024.
I agree, but what really stands out to me, Rob, is how quickly sentiment can shift. Do you think over the last couple of years, how we've gone from extreme mania to extreme despair and panic in some places, and now we seem to be going back towards positivity again, and that will, of course, will overshoot and go back into mania as well if it happens. But over those couple of years, what's really changed in terms of the fundamentals of investing? How much of your investing lifetime does that 2 years make up? So to me, the lesson here is just another reminder of something we've said so many times, which is not to get caught up in the emotion of the market. Because it might be negative today, positive tomorrow, or the other way around. But you really just got to get your head down and stick to your plan and not get blown off course by all this. Because the emotion of the current situation can feel very strong, but it can also change like that.
But whatever happens, you know you are in the right place because we will keep you informed. We will let you know what's happening and we'll put you ahead of the curve. People aren't talking about what we've just covered today, but we will. So we'll make sure that you have the insights before everyone else, because the stuff that we've talked about today isn't consumed by the masses. But if you are consuming it, you've got that extra edge, you've got that extra knowledge, and you have got more chance of being successful. So with that success, dear listener, it's time for me to get my hand out, reach across the virtual airwaves and say to you, have you done our handshake agreement yet? And I want to thank the people who did last week, because we looked at the data after our handshake agreement last week and we saw the stats move. So some of you already have shaken hands with us. You've done that handshake agreement. And if you're thinking, what on earth are you going on about, Mr. Vance? Well, let me tell you. The handshake agreement is this. Rob and I have been going at this podcast for over 10 years. Rob's churning out more and more free content on YouTube. We have more plans for the podcast this year. And we'll keep doing all of this for free. And you know what? We don't mind if you never work with us, with any of our businesses that we have. That is absolutely fine. But what we would like is your help and support. And I think that is a very small ask for the commitment that we've given. So I'm going to shake your hand right now. And we're going to shake on that you are going to either subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can find by searching Property Hub UK. Go over there and subscribe because that helps us. Or share the podcast. Share the podcast. Share this with others. We've given you the inside edge today. Give others that edge. If you've got friends, colleagues, family who have a bit of an interest in property, share the podcast with them. Maybe suggest some of your favourite episodes and get them on board as well. Because podcasts are hard to grow. It's all done by word of mouth. So we need you, dear listener, the people who are the most committed to this podcast, to help us get more people in. So let's do that together. We had nearly 4 million downloads last year, and that was amazing. But let's not get complacent. We need to get this message out far and wide. So share the podcast and or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's shake on that now. I'm looking in your eyes. Are we shaking? I know you will. You're someone who's good on their word. So handshake agreement done. We'll check the stats again and we'll report back next week. But thank you to all those who shook hands last week. And for those who missed out, well, this is your week. Let's shake hands on it.
Yep, and we'll even thank you in advance for doing that by bringing you a little bit more in the form of Hub Extra, the bit of the show where before we wrap up, we give you a little resource, a book, a quote, something to think about, something that's going to enrich your life in some kind of way. And Rob, a special treat for you this week, because I know you love your trains, and the website that I'm bringing this week is called Real Time Trains. Kind of gives away what it's about, but it's the most accurate way of tracking where your train is right now. So obviously all this stuff is integrated into Google Maps and all the rest of it, but Real Time Trains has got the most accurate and the most current data. So if you're looking to catch a train in an hour's time, you could already know where it is and if it's running late. But the best thing is that it also tells you before any other service which platform a train is going to be coming in on. And often it'll tell you this before the boards at the station do. So if you've ever been at Euston Station waiting for a train up to Manchester, as I sometimes am, everyone's there on the concourse staring at the boards, waiting for the platform to flash up. If you're using real-time trains, you can stroll straight past them, be first to the platform when the train's ready to board, and have your pick of the seats, all because of this Hub Extra. You, Rob, are welcome.
Oh, I love it, Rob. That is brilliant. I am going to get that immediately. It actually reminds me of another app, which probably more people are familiar with, but I use whenever I'm at an airport, which is Flight Radar 24. But for almost exactly the same reasons that you've talked about. You see people often running around the airport panicking because the board has told them to go to the gate. And sometimes they're right to panic because their flight's about to leave. But often, the airlines get you there way ahead of time. And I like to not be rushed, and I don't like waiting in queues longer than I need to. So I use Flight Radar 24 to search for my plane that I'm going to be getting on, to see where it is, because they don't just leave it waiting at the airport. They're flying in from somewhere else. And if it's flying in and it's got 40 minutes to land, well, I'll stay and order another coffee. You know, that's what I'll do. I'll chill out. I won't run just because the board's told me to get to the gate. So for similar reasons, I use Flight Radar 24. So there's an Hub Extra for you there if you haven't got that one already. But Rob, real-time trains, I had no idea that existed. That's ace. So thank you.
Well, there you go. A double resource for you this week. That's it for this week's show, but you don't have long to wait until we're next back with you. We'll be in the Sunday Times on Sunday. We've got Ask Rob and Rob on Tuesday. And then, big episode next week, we're revealing our hotspots for 2024. So do make sure you join us. We look forward to seeing you soon. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.